It can be difficult to envision what life was like for children during the Nazi regime in Germany. Influenced by a limited understanding of the horrific events taking place around them, they followed their leaders' calls, saluting words that offered hope while loyalty crushed the souls of many. How did the Nazis use education to instill anti-Semitic beliefs into young Germans? Hello, my name is Jay Tien. I'm a student at NWAC, studying under Professor Marie Immis. I come to you today as part of the Holocaust Service Learning Group 2. I'm here to talk for my part of the group's question topic: what methods did Hitler and the Nazis use to incite anti-Jewish sentiment and coerce support from the German people for their racist and anti-Semitic policies? The focus I will be speaking about in relation to the topic is the education and indoctrination of children and youth during Nazi-era Germany. This was heavily influenced during the 1930s to 40s, as this is an important aspect of the Holocaust history. It promoted the coming generation's worldviews and racial beliefs through the most ultimate form of brainwashing: propaganda. I will be going over main points that will help us uncover the tactics and tools the government used in our 4-point context, such as how anti-Semitism became a problem in Nazi Germany, the curriculum in schools and youth organizations, like the Hitler Youth and the League of German Girls, the role of textbooks and other materials shaping the views of children within school walls, and the emphasis on racial purity and the depiction of Jews as enemies of the state. Our first topic will address the policies that were heavily influenced during this time towards those in education and with exploitable minds, such as the key aspects that glorified the evolution of anti-Semitism during the Third Reich, which promoted its impact on history. Hitler had a strong ideological belief that the Jews were the root cause of Germany's problems and made it the central topic of his leadership. Anti-Semitism had existed prior in Europe for centuries, but it was amplified and institutionalized by the Nazis, making it into a key part of the regime. Nazi Germany's propaganda spread after the party's public claim of the impurity that the Jews held. Through an abundance of push from media such as radio, film, posters, magazines, and even other outlets, the government started to wrap the vision of what was to be the future of Germany. To your right is an example of one of the many propaganda posters used during the Nazi Party's reign. It was an advertisement for the Nazi National Welfare Program, which was racially and socially restrictive, promoting aid would be granted only to individuals who were racially superior or pure, and could prove their value to the Volksgemeinschaft, aka the People's Community for National Unity. Close below is an example of content from the Der Stürmer newspaper. It was issued as a front cover and depicts a ritual murder committed by, what is to be alleged, Jews. This promoted hate and instilled fear towards the Jewish people. One way anti-Semitism was beginning to be handled was by the local political means. Governmental issued regulations and legislations began occurring against the Jewish population. It took effect as early as 1933, starting to limit the livelihoods of everyday life for these people. Law for the Restoration of the Professional Service was the civil reform that began excluding Jews from state service, such as organizations, careers, universities, lawyers, medical service, and the military. Consequences of this were often revoked license, layoffs, overtaxing tuitions, and withheld actors from performing. This law also affected religious freedoms, especially targeting the practice of sexonomy. Another is the denationalization laws, most known as the Nuremberg Laws, which consisted of the foundation for the Nazis' legislative framework towards the systematic prosecution on the Jewish population. These laws consisted of 2 political points: the Reich Citizenship Law, which focused on stripping Jews of their citizenships and rights, and the Law for the Protection of German Blood and German Honor, which implemented forbidding Jews from marrying or having sexual relations with non-Jews. They were rejected and beginning to no longer be recognized based by Nazi ideology. Eventually, there was an economic turnover, the intention to Iranianize all Jewish businesses. This is the process that involved dismissing Jewish workers and managers, then proceeding to transfer institutions and companies from these former workers to non-Jewish German consultants, who acquired them by undermarked bargains and price fixed by Nazi officials. All of this significantly affected and reduced Jewish-led businesses. The Aryanization seeped in socially as it promoted a segregating and solidarity approach after the hate-filled incident of the Kristallnacht, also known as the Night of Broken Glass. It was a pogrom, an ethnic or religiously targeted hate crime against the Jewish people that lasted 2 days. The social discrimination did not falter, as claims from the Der Stürmer, a Nazi party newspaper that mainlined a claim stating, "The Jews are our misfortune." The newspaper was also famously known for having politically aimed views that displayed Jewish people as unfortunate and devilish to German existence. The front page mentioned earlier is an example of this. In our second topic, social injustice didn't just include public shame and unwarranted arrests. It involved grooming the German population to manipulate and control a narrative, making way for the totalitarian state the country became. This involved a lot of suppressive tactics, like taking away freedom of speech and heavily implementing censorship. Anything could be considered treacherous if not aligned with the Nazi Party's views. Censorship happened frequently as the Nazi government prohibited any sort of criticism or negative connotations. This included, but not limited to, shutting down and removing anti-Nazi newspapers and media, taking control of what was displayed publicly through media and news coverage, like banning foreign radio, inciting the ban and burning over 20,000 books that was unfit for Nazi Germany's ideology, and controlling information by restricting mail through the war. The Nazis wanted to isolate the people for having access to anything that broadcasted outside of Germany. It was so severe they gave death sentences to those who were caught listening. More censorship also included heavily pushed propaganda and rewritten textbooks, completely altering the worldviews of the adolescent and naive. Another factor that began to influence children were the youth organizations the Nazi Party prompted that could help steer your kid towards the Nazi Party's ideology and loyalty to the government. There were several centralized groups that held this responsibility: the Hitler Youth, German Youngsters, Young Girls League, League of German Girls, and the voluntary add-on called the Belief in Beauty Society. All other youth organizations were eventually eradicated. So what exactly did these youth organizations conduct and do? The Nazis' goal was to indoctrinate young people, instill anti-Semitism in kids to view Jews as the enemy and have unconditional devotion to duty. There was a dismantlement of social structures and pressured children into joining due to feeder schools and the extermination of other youth groups. Exposure was so high, influence from others failed to be heard. These group organizers also encouraged the members to report to leaders about what was happening in their homes, schools, and churches. They also held many events like rallies and marches, which distracted the kids from focusing on any other curriculum. Established by Kurt Gruber and later directed by Arthur Axmann after Baldur von Schirach, the Hitler Youth, including the German Youngsters, had about 64% of German boys as part of their organization. This group's founding was inspired by British Scouting as it led to a system of physical training and indoctrination. The boys were dressed in uniform, ranked, had insignias, and prepared for the military. They were groomed to be the future fighters that would be a part of World War II. The preparation for the military included drill practices and handling of weapons. However, there seemed to be a split of boys being overwhelmed and looking forward to the future challenges the organization pushed at the start of 1936. The government viewed the youth as Germany's future and wanted to build a symbol that fit the Nazi Party's ideal vision, to be both radically conscious and obedient. Once establishing that joins be mandatory, Hitler Youth had a structure of national levels and was used as a reflection of the state. Baldur von Schirach was eventually convicted after the war for his crimes and sentenced to 20 years. Led by Jutta Rüdiger, the female equivalent to the Hitler Youth was the League of German Girls, which was founded under a National Socialist Association in 1930. The group was also praised and pushed for the same political ideology and focused on traditional women's roles, preparing girls to be future housewives. Skills were taught through this program centered around sewing, cooking, nursing, agriculture, household chores, and physical training. The members of the League were also encouraged to find an appropriate partner to start a family, one who was aligned with the quality of a Nazi. However, early in the organization, the girls had leisure-like activities such as folk dancing, language, song recitals, sports, and events with anti-Semitic depictions like rallies and national events. Joining was also mandatory, and an estimated about 15,000 girls had joined the League. Those who were outside the organization were noted to be treated poorly and shunned. This group intended to bring devotion to the community, have many children, and achieve practical work, all in line with the Nazis' radical visions, which can continue generationally. All these teachings helped these girls carry out various roles during World War II by holding camps for evacuated citizens and aiding the wounded in raided areas. Jutta Rüdiger was eventually convicted after the war for her crimes and detained for 2.5 years, but ended up released without trial. All Nazi-based youth organizations were dissolved in 1945. Our third topic centralizes the political indoctrination and propaganda that was enforced in schools outside of just the youth organizations. It had trapped kids in a mindset where life outside of the Nazis' teachings and regime was rejected. The intention was to fill the minds of children with ideals of racial purity and Germany's future. Hitler wanted to appeal and instill in young Germans that they had a purpose and not underestimate their values to society. He wanted to create a new order. This led to Jewish children being prohibited from attending state and private schools. Even entry was restricted to Jewish-based institutions. The new order was the beginning of the educational divide. Education emerged as a vital instrument for the Nazis. The government turned the education system into a hive mind for Nazi ideology and stripped Jewish teachers from their positions. This soon resulted to the formation of the Nazis' Teachers League, to which non-Nazis were pressured into joining. Teachers who were a part of the league had to wear uniforms and swear an oath to Hitler while being forced to teach the new corrupted teachings. Curriculum in schools had been pervaded to warp and match the political values of the Nazi Party, which included a syllabus that focused on racial education to spot out anyone as subhuman and the Enlightenment about Aryan supremacy. Swastika signs were also placed in classrooms and textbooks and had flags displayed in schools. The influence of Aryan supremacist views resulted in the alteration of history in textbooks, a natural law of race that promoted northern races as superior. There were tales of Germanic Nazi heroes and conquests that supported the myth of the worshipped Aryan society, along with the exaggeration of the Treaty of Versailles that was deemed as unfair. A leader principle was also pushed to require and approve a culture of hero worship, a more substantial bias of the deed than the thought. Sports and physical activities were supported by Nazi education, but subjects like math and science were heavily neglected and limited outside of using the idea of racial science. The government also suppressed the ideas of interracial marriage, avoid those with genetic diseases, and taught that their principle in life was to have children of their own. This eventually led to the formation of the youth organizations that were priorly discussed. The indoctrination of children didn't just circulate in schools. It went as far as infiltrating homes and shared social spaces through games and children's books. These literatures made youthful readers desensitized to anti-Semitic depictions of Jews, such as portraying them as poisonous beings infiltrating German life. In addition, board games were advertising radical beliefs and normalizing hateful behavior through political propaganda. This supported the push to have these children turn towards militarism, as devoted duty was glamorized by the government. One example, titled and translated from German, called "You Can't Trust a Fox in the Heath and a Jew on His Oath," is a child's book comparing the metaphorical behavior of an animal to a stereotype of a Jewish man. Another example is the child's board game called Jews Out. The game encouraged students and players to identify with the party's institutions, basically a cleansing for purity. Players are tasked to collect 6 Jew hats from a residential spot and bring them to the center. The first player to do so wins. This was a realistic reflection of arresting and deporting Jews. Our last example goes over another children's book, titled and translated from German, called The Poisonous Mushroom. The narrative follows a young boy learning to differentiate between edible and poisonous mushrooms, drawing a parallel to identifying good and bad people. As the story unfolds, it explicitly likens mushrooms to Jewish people, teaching young German children to recognize and be wary of Jews. These examples instilled permanent beliefs onto young Germans, making them grow up into a blind loyalty and hate-filled opinions that had stayed even after the war was over. Many selfless sacrifices were made as these children were indoctrinated in positions for ultimate devotion to the Nazi Party, and ultimately Adolf Hitler. Brainwashing was highly effective towards the German youth as its effects outlasted past the war. When the war was officially deemed over, the youth organizations in the Nazi Party were outlawed. There were efforts for re-education and democratic values, emphasizing cultural, political, and economic changes between the nations. Schools also introduced measures to preserve the memories of fallen soldiers and other victims, pay homage to the dead, and attend ceremonies. Youth centers were established in Germany to offer children sports and cultural activities that were tools to re-educate youth principles from the prior Nazi ideology. Eventually, the United Nations International Children's Emergency and the Declaration of the Rights of the Child were established to help the Lost Generation efforts and children be protected from further war crimes that could use the adolescents as leverage. To live in the era of Nazi Germany is a horrific thought to envision, as there was a mass destruction to end a race, an effort to change history, and alter society to a new normalcy. There were multiple reconstruction efforts to help make sure Germany stayed stable after the war, and to attempt to break free from the harmful ideologies. These events have stained history as we know it, but it is a crucial reminder in our present to not have tragedies like this repeat. Anti-Semitism still lingers today through silence and outwardly in politics. Learning from the past is crucial to helping us evolve as a society. Thank you for listening. I hope this encourages you to keep some historical knowledge with you, especially during our current events, as it can be impactful for our lives and futures.